Welcome to Arizona Sun Times Sunday for September 25th, 2022. I'm Michael Patrick Leahy, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of the Arizona Sun Times. You can find us on the web at arizonasuntimes.com. That's arizonasuntimes.com. We're a fast-growing digital news site where we report the facts of local political news from a constitutional conservative worldview. Here's a fact you're certainly aware of. Midterm elections will be held 6 weeks and 2 days from today on November 8th. The two marquee statewide races are hotly contested. In the race for governor, GOP nominee and former TV news anchor Kari Lake faces Democrat nominee and current Secretary of State Katie Hobbs. In the U.S. Senate race, incumbent U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, the Democrat nominee, faces GOP nominee Blake Masters. We have an important new poll that shows the current state of both races. You may recall that last week, Katie Hobbs announced that she would not debate Kari Lake. We wondered at the time what impact that decision would have on the gubernatorial race. A poll released by the Trafalgar Group on Monday suggests that Hobbs' decision did not help her chances of winning. The poll, conducted between September 14th and September 17th among 1,080 likely 2022 voters in Arizona, shows Lake with a lead of more than 4 points, 50% for Lake to 45.6% for Hobbs. The margin of error for the poll is 2.9%. The new poll represents a 4-point margin increase for Lake over Hobbs since the last Trafalgar poll, which was released at the end of August and showed Lake and Hobbs in a statistical tie. The new Trafalgar poll had surprising news in the U.S. Senate race, where the Real Clear Politics average of polls has shown that Mark Kelly, with a lead of several points over Masters over the past few weeks. According to Trafalgar, Kelly leads Masters by 46.6% to 45.4%, but that 1.2% advantage for Kelly is well within the poll's 2.9% margin of error. The races for Secretary of State and Attorney General are not quite as close. In the race for Secretary of State, GOP nominee Mark Finchem leads Democrat nominee Adrian Fontes by 6 points, 47% to 41%. And in the race for Attorney General, GOP nominee Abe Hamadeh leads Democrat nominee Chris Mays by 9 points, 50% to 41%. But we have to add this caution on polling. According to Robert Cahaley, that's the man who runs the Trafalgar Group, it is becoming increasingly difficult to poll conservative voters who support the MAGA agenda and Donald Trump. This phenomenon of the shy Trump voter was first identified by the late great pollster Pat Goodell back in the 2016 election, and it continued into 2020. I had the great pleasure of working with Pat Goodell during the 2016 election cycle when I served as the polling editor for Breitbart News. We had hired Pat to design the polling questions we used in a series of 50 state polls we conducted in the lead-up to the 2016 election. Goodell was one of the few pollsters who accurately predicted that Donald Trump would secure an electoral college victory in 2016. Goodell believed, and evidence bore him out, that many voters did not want to tell pollsters over the phone they supported Donald Trump for fear of being canceled. So traditional polling undercounted Trump support among voters in both 2016 and 2020. Robert Cahaley of the Trafalgar Group said on Twitter earlier this month that this phenomenon is even stronger today. Shy voters, he says, have become submerged voters. Here's what he tweeted out. In 2020, people who supported Trump or espoused conservative values out of step with woke culture found themselves being canceled or doxxed. This led to hidden voters that most polling undercounted. Therefore, Trump support in key battleground states exceeded expectations. Now that the Biden administration has essentially classified MAGA Republicans as a threat to democracy, marshaling the federal law enforcement forces to focus on them, the move has created a new type of voters who would be even harder to poll or even to estimate. I call this new group submerged voters. They aren't putting stickers on their cars, signs in their yards, posting their opinions, or even answering polls. At this point, I think it's fair to say that Biden's pursuit of and attacks on MAGA Republicans has created an army of voters who will be virtually impossible to poll. The 2022 Republican turnout will likely be higher than any of the polls or models are showing. All polls, including ours, will understate the impact of these submerged voters. Our advice at the Arizona Sun-Times: take all polling with a grain of salt, and remember, there's always a possibility that polls are being manipulated to advance a particular narrative. We'll have more stories from the digital pages of the Arizona Sun-Times after this. Virtue signaling blue state liberals are apoplectic that last week Florida Governor Ron DeSantis transported 50 illegal migrants who were apprehended crossing the U.S. Mexico border to the liberal enclave of Martha's Vineyard, an island that's part of the sanctuary state of Massachusetts. Predictably, a Democrat sheriff in Behar County, Texas, has now launched an investigation into DeSantis, though at his press conference, he couldn't quite say what federal laws he claimed DeSantis had violated. Since Arizona is one of 4 states that border Mexico, the others are Texas, New Mexico, and California, we thought it would be worthwhile to take a closer look at the issue and point out some facts that can put this whole episode in context. This week, the federal government announced that 1.8 million illegal migrants have been apprehended by U.S. immigration officials crossing the U.S. Mexico border during the first 10 months of fiscal year 2022. With 2 more months until the end of this fiscal year later this week on September 30th, that number is expected to increase to well over 2 million illegal migrants. A significant percentage of those illegal migrants are crossing the border from Mexico right here in Arizona. The number of illegal migrants crossing the U.S. Mexico border is significantly higher this year than the 1.6 million illegal migrants who were apprehended last year, fiscal year 2021. Compare that to the mere 400,000 illegal migrants who were apprehended by U.S. immigration officials in fiscal year 2020. That's the last full fiscal year of the Donald Trump administration. Let's face it, since the inauguration of Joe Biden as President of the United States in January 2021, our borders have been entirely open. And the rest of the world knows that, so they are pouring across the border. Some of these illegal migrants are just seeking a better life, but some of them, as a recent report at Just the News indicates, are criminals who are seeking to take advantage of our open borders. In fact, news reports indicate that the Venezuelan government is intentionally opening its prisons and encouraging the released prisoners to enter the U.S. illegally, where they can conduct ongoing criminal operations. And the Biden administration is not enforcing our existing immigration laws. That is a fact. Back in April, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, also a Republican, began busing illegal migrants who had crossed the U.S. Mexico border to Washington, D.C. All told, since then, 3 Republican governors, Abbott of Texas, Ducey of Arizona, and Ron DeSantis of Florida, have transported a grand total of 13,000 illegal migrants from their states to liberal blue cities and states that call themselves sanctuaries for illegal aliens. The Hill estimates that Arizona Governor Ducey has sent 1,800 illegal immigrants from Arizona to Washington, D.C. So let's run the numbers on that. In the last 10 months, 1.8 million illegal migrants have crossed the border into the U.S., and 3 Republican governors have sent less than 1% of those illegal arrivals to Martha's Vineyard, Washington, D.C., New York City, and Chicago. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has sent a lot more than 1% of these 1.8 million illegal migrants into the heartland of the United States, usually in the middle of the night. And we heard no whining from virtue signaling blue state liberals about that. What do Arizona's gubernatorial candidates have to say about the open border? Democrat Katie Hobbs released a TV commercial earlier this month in which she says she, quote, has a plan, end quote, for securing the border. The commercial doesn't say what that plan is, but her website offers this. It's past time for Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform, her website says, adding that at the state level, as governor, she will boost funding for sheriffs and local law enforcement, fund community centers and hospitals. She also calls on the federal government to pass legislation to increase personnel and invest in technology at ports of entry, reevaluate how visas are allocated, and come up with a real plan to address the crisis at the border before lifting Title 42. So, Katie Hobbs' plan is, in part, to ask the federal government to come up with a real plan to address the crisis at the border. GOP gubernatorial nominee Carrie Lake has said, quote, she's not a fan, end quote, of the idea of transporting illegal migrants from Arizona to blue states. Don't send them into America, she says. Send them back to Mexico. Her border security plan is pretty straightforward and very different from Katie Hobbs' plan. If elected governor, Carrie Lake says she will finish Trump's border wall, which currently covers about 245 miles of the 373 total miles of the Arizona Mexico border, call on the state legislature to restore the Arizona Rangers as a special state funded law enforcement force whose mission will be to secure Arizona's borders from cartel thugs, enhance the Arizona National Guard's presence at the border, and empower law enforcement to make trespassing arrests, and create a special border court to rapidly adjudicate trespassing crimes from these non citizen illegal immigrants. One thing is clear when Arizona voters go to the polls on November 8th to select a new governor, dealing with illegal immigration will be one of their top concerns. We'll have more stories from the digital pages of the Arizona Sun-Times when we come back. The Maricopa County Grand Jury indicted two women on Monday for possessing over 850,000 counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl, enough to cause potentially millions of overdoses. Quote, 2 out of 5 counterfeit pills that come across our border are laced with lethal doses of fentanyl. These drugs are being marketed to our youth in the most proliferous ways and are being produced in candy like colors. We must hold those who bring these lethal pills into our community accountable, end quote. This, according to County Attorney Rachel Mitchell. The women charged were Kimberly Guadalupe Torres Marin, age 26, and Alexa Torres Marin, age 19. They were arrested on August 24th after Maricopa County Sheriff deputies found the pills stashed in duffel bags. The women were en route to Phoenix when they were searched. Both received 1 count of sale or transportation of narcotic drugs, a Class 2 felony. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office will hold a community forum on September 27th to discuss the fentanyl crisis in Maricopa County. The public is welcome. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be fatal, depending on the user's body size and tolerance. The DEA shared that 42% of pills tested for fentanyl contained over the deadly limit. 1 kilogram of fentanyl has the potential to kill roughly 500,000 people. Moreover, Maricopa County deputies are not the only officials catching fentanyl couriers. Nogales Port of Entry Director Michael Humphreys shared that multiple fentanyl seizures occurred during the week of September 12th to the 18th. On Tuesday, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers found 20,000 fentanyl pills plus 6,000 multicolored rainbow fentanyl pills in a car's gas tank. In these reported incidents, officials confiscated around 702,000 fentanyl pills. That's the equivalent to just over 70 kilograms of the opioid. This means CBP officers apprehended enough pills there to kill another 35 million people. This number accounts for a single week at a single port along the southern border. The DEA warned that this rainbow fentanyl had been found in 18 states as of August 30th. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shared that over 150 people die daily from overdoses related to synthetic opioids. We'll be back with more after this. Well, the race for the U.S. Senate in Arizona between incumbent Democrat Senator Mark Kelly and Republican nominee Blake Masters is tightening, according to the most recent polls. 46% for Kelly and 45% for Masters. This, according to the latest Trafalgar poll. The political website 538.com reports that Kelly votes for Democrat President Joe Biden's agenda more than 94% of the time. This is the same Joe Biden who earlier this month said the 74 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 represented a threat to democracy. It was a viciously partisan attack on the Make America Great Again movement and the Republican Party. And Senator Mark Kelly votes with Joe Biden more than 94% of the time. Surprisingly, Medium.com reported that back in July, the Kelly campaign announced a group called Republicans for Kelly. Here's what some of those Republicans for Kelly had to say at the time. Former Arizona State Senator Heather Carter said Senator Kelly, quote, has done a tremendous job for Arizona, and he is able to cut through all of the hyper-partisanship back in D.C. to do a wonderful job for our state. He cuts through that hyper-partisanship, but votes with Joe Biden more than 94% of the time. Mayor Chip Wilson of Apache Junction said, quote, Senator Kelly has proven that he's willing and capable to roll up his sleeves and get things done without the partisan bickering we've all become too accustomed to these days, end quote. Councilman Bart Turner of Glendale said, quote, sadly, too many elected officials in Washington these days resort to partisan bickering that stalls progress. Mark pushes partisanship aside, gets past the typical Washington gridlock, and makes concentrated, earnest efforts to bring about real progress for his state, end quote. He pushes partisanship aside, yet votes with President Joe Biden 94% of the time. Now, these Republicans for Kelly said all these nice things about Senator Kelly a little more than a month before President Biden. You know, the President, Kelly votes with more than 94% of the time, called his political rivals in the Republican Party extremists and a threat to democracy. And they said those things before President Biden's Justice Department persuaded a U.S. magistrate judge to sign a search warrant, one that many say violated the Fourth Amendment rights of former President Trump, that allowed them to raid the former president's residence at Mar-a-Lago. There's little surprise that the reaction to Biden's hyper-partisan speech have given Blake Masters' campaign some new momentum. While Kelly holds a significant fundraising advantage over Masters, Politico reported last week that, quote, money is moving back into Arizona for Republican Blake Masters. A new PAC, Sentinel Action Fund, said they're spending $5 million to boost the Masters campaign. And there's a spring in the step of the Masters campaign after the release of the new Trafalgar poll. Quote, this race is a dead heat despite Mark Kelly spending $60 million to paint himself as some type of moderate when he's been nothing but a rubber stamp for Joe Biden's failed agenda. Masters campaign spokesperson Zach Henry told us at the Arizona Sun-Times, quote, Blake Masters is gaining momentum every day as voters learn about Kelly's extreme voting record and reject him, end quote, Henry added. A little more than 3 weeks after President Joe Biden's hyper-partisan speech calling 74 million Americans a threat to democracy, some of the backlash from independent voters and Republicans appears to be influencing voter attitudes here in Arizona about the Senate race between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters. Given that backlash, it appears highly unlikely that Senator Mark Kelly will invite President Joe Biden to come to Arizona and campaign for him over the next 6 weeks and 2 days until the November 8th election. That's our program for tonight, Sunday, September 25th, 2022. We'll be back again next Sunday, same time, same station. In the meantime, make sure to visit our website, ArizonaSunTimes.com. That's ArizonaSunTimes.com for breaking stories every day. I'm Michael Patrick Leahy. Thank you for joining us tonight.